Hola a todos.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Hijas de la Chicanx. De aquí y de allá.
Sí, de aquí y de allá.
Are we going to say that every time we start a podcast? Because nobody knows that that's really our catchphrase. Should we elaborate on that right now? That it's both our logo and our catchphrase.
I mean, I think so. Yeah.
Yes. For those of you that do not know or have not paid attention to the logo, it is Hijas de la Chicanx, de aquí y de allá.
Yeah.
And it's a twist to the one catchphrase that everyone knows.
As ni de aquí ni de allá.
Correcto, pero we are... What are we? We are...
I mean, we're de aquí y de allá porque, pues, we're...
This is us owning que somos de aquí y de allá.
Absolutely.
Ni de aquí ni de allá, no somos de aquí y de allá.
Overturning that ni de aquí ni de allá, that state of limbo and saying, no, we are de aquí and we are de allá.
Yes. So if you hear us say it, we're probably eventually, if one day all goes well, we're going to have merch. We're totally going to put that verse on a sweatshirt. De aquí y de allá. Y el little nopalito en la esquinita.
Ay, nopalito, yeah. Yeah.
But welcome to our episode. It's our second episode.
It's our second episode, and I'm so excited. Yeah.
Yes, we're so happy to be rolling again and making this a habit. Because, you know, it takes 7 times to make a habit.
Oh, really?
7
I didn't
times
know
in a
that.
row, and you
I
make a
didn't know
habit.
that.
So once we get to the 7th episode, that means it's officially a habit and it's sticking, and we're going
well,
through
there you
with
go.
it.
After we do it 7 times, it'll stick. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but today we are talking about. I always like Ritzy introducing the topics of the day. I really love how you give the little, definition of it, and you tell everybody. So please let us know, what are we talking about today?
Yeah. So today we are talking about, shame. I think, let's have a real conversation about the shame factor. Being Chicanx, being Latinx, there's always
shame, not shade.
Yeah, because girl, you thought that
I
was
thought
saying
earlier
shade.
when she mentioned it, she's like, "Oh, we're gonna talk about shade," and I heard shade, and I was like, "Okay, the sun is out, the shade is real."
There's no shade today. Cloudy day.
No shade. No shame.
No, we're talking about, the shame factor that you feel when you're Chicanx or Mexican American in the U.S. and how do we overcome the shame factor, and overturn it to sort of empower ourselves. So that's going to be, we're going to sit down, we're going to have real talk. We're going to speak truth today.
Yes.
It's obviously going to be a really intimate conversation.
There might be tears.
No,
not the best.
Tears, laughter, a combination of both things.
It's a really, I think it's a sensitive topic for many.
Yeah, for many. It's an intimate conversation.
Definitely.
That I think you would have, maybe privately with like a close friend,
but we are close friends.
We are very close
and this
friends.
podcast, I mean, if you're listening to it, you've already become part of our circle, and we feel comfortable enough to talk about this on a mic and have someone listen to it and maybe relate to it.
Yeah, I think, maybe sharing these stories will give us the ability to empower ourselves and to, recognize how these stories have sort of molded us into the people that we are today. I know you and they have definitely molded me, and I'm sure that they've shaped you and influenced you.
It's like battle. What is it called? Battle scars.
Oh yeah, the battle scars.
Yes, yeah. They're things that didn't break you; they just made you stronger. And I think that if you have gone through this, then maybe this is your battle scar, but you wear it proudly, and you only grow from it.
You grow from it, and you realize that. I think I always have this not trouble, but with battle, because I think that we constantly face a battle, but that shouldn't be the case. I think we should normalize, going into battle or having battle scars, because I think
no, of course
I know
not.
One
and this
thing,
is the change that we're trying
absolutely.
To make from it.
I think one thing for sure that I want for future generations is I don't want them to bear the battle scars that I've bared.
Of course, somebody has to go through the hard parts, but it's always room for the good parts too.
Es la lucha, no? And I think that's Correcto. Why what we're doing is very much, means so much to me, because I think I look back at my ancestors. I know for a fact that they carried so many battle scars with them.
Oh, of course, same here. I can totally relate to that. It's a mutual feeling, and I think that it's amazing to have a platform to be able to do that.
Absolutely.
To speak up, to have a voice. I love how you ended the last episode where you said
your voice matters.
Your voice matters. Did you say it in Spanish or English?
No, I said it in English.
En English, sí, pero tu voz.
Claro, tu voz importa.
Sí. Y completely agree with you. This is, like she mentioned, more of an intimate conversation. We're totally gonna have
we've got like tea beside us. So.
Well, I have a michelada next to me. Nothing. Okay, let's be honest. Let's be real. If we're gonna be real today, let's talk about the realness.
It's okay.
We got tea to start the episode, but then somebody brought micheladas, and Christy's
I think you can. Yeah,
Christy came out with it's called compré tamarindos de Mexico.
Yeah.
And I purposely brought these like stick tamarindos to put in micheladas. So cada vez que hay micheladas, I have to go all out.
It's an adult version of like you've got candy and you've got some form of alcohol in there. Yeah.
So if you hear me slurping over here, I'm literally taking a sip from my michelada. It's already 5:00, so it doesn't matter anymore.
I like how I have like chamomile tea and a michelada.
And a michelada.
Me, yeah.
Yes. No, but yeah, we're gonna go forward with the conversation. Before doing so,
yes.
Reminder to send us your emails.
Remember we talked about it last episode. If you are a Chicanx artist and whatever creative medium you perform or you do, whether it be painting, photography, composing music, maybe maybe you're a muralist, whatever it is, a writer or poet, send us your work. Shoot us an email.
Some people have already.
Yes,
which we're so happy and excited about, because we're so happy to see different stories.
Absolutely.
But like we mentioned last episode,
we won't share it until next month. We're trying to get a collection of them, and like Christy said, don't fret, don't be afraid. You're going to be shared at one point, because there are going to be episodes. What did you call it? Episodes galore.
Yes.
But you will be shared out at one point, and we want to build a community. We want to give other people a platform. We don't want to be the sole people.
Yeah. And for this specific segment, I wanted to like say, oh, it's gonna be unanimous if you want us to, but then that kind of like goes against the point of what we're trying to do here, is showcasing fellow Chicanx. So unfortunately, no, it wouldn't be unanimous unless you felt very, very strongly that you wanted it to be unanimous, but you wanted to show your artwork. Then we can do something like that. We respect that, yes. Yeah. But the whole point of it is to kind of give word of mouth to talent, whether it's creative medium or, like you said, music.
I think in the last episode you said we want to lend a hand.
Yes.
Manos a la obra. I think it's something that you mentioned, and I find that so beautiful. Yes, we want to lend a hand. What we want to do is we want to work with our Chicanx community.
Yes, and there's already a big Chicanx community out there.
There's such a large demographic in Chicago.
Yes, and we just want to be part of it. Yeah. We know that there's already a movement going on, and most of those people, from my perspective, come from like the Pilsen area. So shout out to Pilsen. My family grew up in Pilsen, so that's the reason why I know that, and I've gone many times. So a lot of people.
Casa Aslan, it has a history in Pilsen.
Claro. So we already know there's a community out there. We just kind of want to add on to that, make it bigger. There's a podcast. If you're another podcast that focuses on Chicanx or anything related to what we do, let's collab. I mean, the opportunities are
enormous, infinite. Yeah.
Yes.
So let's jump right into our episode.
Let's jump right into it. Sensitive topic: shame. Go.
Shame.
Go.
So before we even start talking about shame, I thought that we would give a definition from wonderful scholars Roger Valence and E. Chacos, who presented on shame in Australia, and they have this wonderful paper called A Cultural Bridge. And here they really kind of elaborate on what shame is about. And they write, shame has resonances of being singled out so that the individual is unduly the focus of attention, of the inexplicable, of deep feelings for which there are no words, a fear of trespassing across boundaries that may be sacred, a sense of being powerless and ineffectual. And shame is not something that most can talk about, and one suspects simply because it is so inexpressible. And they add, does not arise from a sense of an act by oneself or another, more it comes about due to attention or circumstances. Shame comes from within. yet shame engulfs one and disempowers and arises in some real sense from outside oneself. I mean, these are powerful words, in which they gave this this paper on education in Australia, and then they tackled, the shame factor. And really, lo que también significa, ¿no? En español es esta vergüenza que no, que te señala y que te hace el foco de atención y que te causa, ¿no?, una sensación de impotencia o ineficacia, y que también a veces, ¿no?, este tipo de vergüenza te envuelve y te desempodera, ¿no? Te quita ese orgullo, te otorga un poco de, bueno, no necesariamente orgullo, ¿no?, pero te silencia. And these are powerful words, but really these amazing scholars and writers really expand on what shame is, because it really is inexpressible, I think, right, Christy? I mean,
yes,
it's something that, you feel, but you don't know how to express necessarily. And it's something that really kind of takes away from your empowerment. So it does disempower. And I think that even if you look at the English definition of the word shame, I don't think it captures entirely what it is that it feels like for the Chicanx, Latinx, or any other marginalized community.
Yeah, I think it's not till you go through it that you really understand what it is. I feel like a lot of people tend to say it doesn't affect me, so it doesn't matter. And that isn't the way of viewing it. You have to be more open to understanding people go through this. Going back to the topic of last episode, colorism.
Yes,
I think that's
colorism.
a big factor when it comes to shame. That's a role that is played when it comes to shame, I believe, in the Chicanx, Latinx community. And I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, but that's kind of like my input when you mentioned the definition, what I thought of automatically. There are so many views, and I will just right now automatically tell you, or kind of open the space up to let you know that if you feel a certain way about a topic that we're speaking about, or you want to give your insight on it, please feel free to do so through our social media platforms or through our email. Whatever rocks your boat, do it. But do you want to elaborate on that?
Yes. So, when I think about shame, I often think, how can we overcome that shame? I think that a lot of us, we've all kind of, as when you know that you're in the margins or you're in the periphery, you've encountered shame. But, a lot of us would much rather overlook it than have to acknowledge or contemplate it. Or, sometimes a lot of us are afraid of, I know myself at one point too, being introspective and kind of taking it apart, the shame and what triggered it, and asking, the big questions. I think for me, being Chicanx and, going through, living in the United States and living away from home when I went to university, I often I had those moments, in academia,
Especially you. I will say that I feel you because of what you studied. You have told me in previous conversations, and I hope you don't mind that I'm mentioning this, but you have probably felt that way, and that's
and
a reality.
Absolutely. And you feel it, and I think that you flatten that and you silence it, and then it becomes what, Valence and Chacos talk about. It disempowers you, and you're walking through life with something that doesn't allow you to portray all of your to be all of yourself.
Be true to yourself.
But I always think about one of my favorite quotes, and I love Audre Lorde, and she's an amazing poet, writer. I love her, activist, and she wrote, she has this quote. If I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive. And I think that when I came to, I think in academia I had this like academic awakening, and I sort of knew, oh wow, I can't let it eat me alive. Like I can't be living my life through other people's representations of me.
Of course.
And I think that's so true, and that resonates with the Chicanx community.
It's so powerful when you really open up your mind to think like that. I strongly believe that generations past haven't allowed themselves to open their mind to that, for being scared of being judged, for being scared of having a voice. But what I really appreciate about our generation is the fact that we are overcoming those. Do you want to cry? You look, I just see her. She's like, yes.
I feel you, sister.
I feel you, sis. But yeah, I mean, like, that's why we have a podcast. We want to talk about things like this that maybe others weren't so comfortable. And I mean, we've come through so much.
It's so much. We've come through so much, and I think our past generations and our generations, we go through so much trauma that we don't want to speak about, and that's hard. And I respect that, you know, that we don't unpack. Sorry, and I respect that, and I think we don't do it because it's hard. Yeah,
exactly. It is hard, and having a voice is hard. Not many people will be comfortable, but maybe this podcast is your little like foquito diciéndote abre la boca más, so speak up for yourself, take in that power that you have and portray it to the world. Let it shine,
or you know, maybe, you know, if you're not just ready for that yet, you know, know that you have a community and people who are listening to you and respect you.
Yes, and it all comes from your environment. For me personally, and this is probably something super personal, but in my career, I found myself in those margins, and where I felt like I couldn't be myself.
Right.
But I also knew that I had a culture inside of me that I wanted to shine and to let
wanted to expose.
Yes, and that the reason I say in my career is because I have came from the American market and I have transitioned into the Latin market. And the reason that I did that is because I wanted to feel more at home with people that understood, you know, the Latin American culture. Not saying that we're seeing that nowadays with music.
I mean, there's still a lot of work to do.
There's so much work to do, but we're seeing the crossover artists now. We're seeing how for example, reggaeton is taking a big swing at, you know, crossing borders. We see
there are these initiatives.
Yeah, Banda MS has a song with Snoop Dogg, like things like that to lighten up the mood.
I like how you're like, I'm going to sneak in something about Banda MS.
No, but
Snoop Dogg
and Snoop Dogg. No, but yeah, like just kind of going back to that because I mentioned my career. So there are times where you feel like you have to be stuck in these margins and you cannot be open about who you are. And one thing about me is that I am so open about my culture, and I am no longer going to
don't
hide it in margins because of what that might look like to others. I won't allow it. I won't allow the shame to be reflected on me, because that shouldn't be the case. You should own who you are, your culture, and be open to discussing, you know, different topics like this.
You know, you talking about, you know, how the market that you worked in and all of that, I couldn't help but recall a statistic that I read that said 75% of Latinx members don't show all of themselves in corporations or at work spheres or in their business. And I thought, you know, and it's going back to that shame, you know, we don't feel you're all, you know, that you're at the periphery, and sometimes you don't acknowledge, you know, the quote, you know, elephant in the room, and so you don't expose all of yourself. And you know, how do you go to this work setting where, you know, most of your life you dedicate to this work setting where you can't even be entirely all of you, where you have to silence part of yourself, maybe half of yourself, and, you know, the psychological ramifications, the repercussions of that. I think about that a lot, even in academic institutions and academia. That's the case there too.
It's universal. It's literally universal. You could talk about, you know, my music career, your academic, you know, all of that. It's very universal, and I'm sure somebody listening to this right now
it's like snapping their fingers and like, yes, I feel that.
They already are imagining a time where they felt like they had to, you know, deflate themselves to feel like they were part of something or someone. But no, I agree with you 100%.
Yes. Going back to what you were talking about, you know, I don't know if there's like a specific moment that you're kind of remembering from the job that you worked at. But I know for me, I think when I, used to talk about shame, and when I was being really introspective with this, or retrospective really, and looking back at my life, I couldn't help but remember something that happened to me when I was 14.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this summer internship, and it was in Chicago, and I had the summer internship, and I had finished it, and there was going to be this celebratory kind of end of internship meeting with everybody that I had done projects with. Okay. And all of these people were adults. They were, like, there was like middle-aged men, middle-aged women, and they were all white, and I was the only, Chicanx, Latinx, young woman in the room. And so they were going to do
intimidating.
It was
right?
it was already intimidating as is. And so I was going to go into this conference room. They were going to celebrate me. They were going to buy food. I was going to give a PowerPoint presentation kind of summarizing everything that I had done that summer. Mm-hmm. And so anyhow, I remember that we were done, right? The whole presentation finishes. We're about to grab like food from our paper plates. And I remember that one of the men that I had done a project with, middle-aged man, he said something to me, and he said, I thought he was going to come to congratulate me. Mm-hmm. And, I'm 14, and I felt so happy and so proud of myself for everything that I'd done. And he says to me in a really loud voice, he's like, well, at least, you didn't spend the summer, selling, what is it, shaved ice and corn in a cup in Little Village.
Are you kidding me?
And my heart, Christy, like
at this young age.
I was 14. Yeah. Uh-huh. I'm not going to name any names. Or
of course. No, and that's not the point. It was in. That's the point. Not the point at all.
That's not the point. Mm-hmm. But I remember thinking to myself, part of me wanted to cry. Mm-hmm. I think the tears wanted to come more so because every other adult in that room laughed along with him.
Because he said it in such a vocal way that you felt. And you were so young that you didn't understand right from wrong. But because you didn't doesn't mean that you didn't understand.
I understood the dynamics of what was happening.
Yes.
I understood that, but I think what also left me in shock was I thought that out of all these adults who had said, throughout the summer that my job had been wonderful, that I was such a wonderful human being or whatever, would at least say something like, hey, whatever his name was, maybe that's not the right thing to say.
Stand up for you.
But nobody did. And so you had all these adults mocking a 14-year-old's culture, typecasting her parents' jobs, which, by the way, I knew at that young age, and I'm glad that I didn't. I wasn't going to say, hey, my parents aren't that, no, because I fully honor, the job of, street vendors, like, I fully honor that. So I wasn't gonna, validate or make myself, say, hey, no, that's not what my parents do. How dare you? But, him parroting those jobs and him thinking that he could say that to a 14-year-old. I mean, it was so much at that young age. But I just remember, Christy, going home and my parents asking me, how was your internship? How was that that presentation that you were going to give them, where you were going to, summarize everything that you had done that summer? How was it? Mm-hmm. And I just said, they were so excited to hear, and I just said it was fine, Yeah. Because, and they didn't know at the moment.
Fine is the word that you should always read between the lines. Yeah. When someone says fine, it's not fine.
And I was not fine, and I just remember as a teenager kind of recoiling. And I went back, I had to go back, for like a week or so, and I go back to that statistic. I was no longer able to fully be myself. And
okay,
so
I was about to ask you, do you think you overcame how that moment felt, or you embraced it and decided to do something about it?
I mean, as an adult, I see where that was coming from, and I've utilized that shame now. I've utilized it to overcome it and to empower myself and empower my culture, and to kind of, dismantle racism, and I guess you could even say like white supremacy, because I mean, I guess in some ways that was also coming into play, but I've definitely utilized it. But I think at that young age, you don't fully understand the shame. So I think the shame I understood when I was much older, and I had the tools to kind of pick it apart and start to realize that what I had encountered was racism and shame, and
of course,
the mocking of, and classism, right? It was also classism because of the jobs that he was parroting.
Of course, he como que le tiró tiro a todo lo que pudo.
Todo lo que pudo.
Y tú, ahí de 14 años, like, sir, what are you doing? What are you talking about? Yeah.
It must have been, I remember trying, I think a lot of teenagers do this, and maybe you can even relate to this, but you try to repress it.
Yeah, of course.
But then you also, in a way, it also causes you to hide part of yourself. You repress it while you also hide part of yourself. And I think, how can you orchestrate the mechanisms to overcome that shame is the thing. And I think as teens, living in the margins, you don't always have those mechanisms, or nobody,
And I think also this is where it comes into play the generations before, and where, not saying that they never wanted to stand up for themselves, but they always felt, because of maybe staying in the United States, work, losing friendships, they never spoke up. So it comes into that play where, okay, do I say something and possibly lose everything I have worked for in this country, or do I keep it to myself, and it's an insecurity that I have to deal with for future? So I think that it just becomes a question of many faces, and it's up to that person and their maturity level, how they take it. And I applaud you for, growing from that moment, not allowing his words to keep you in where he wanted you to be. And look at you now. I mean, I tell you this all the time. I'm so proud of, like, I know you're just my friend, and I've only known you for like maybe 3-4 years now, but only solo 3-4 años. But I see that you have fully embraced your career. You go into depth with everything you do,
and now I research Mexican culture.
And
I do cultural research,
and many people can't jump from that, and you need to know that you can. And I mean, Yaritza is full proof of that.
Oh my god, I love you so much. I think that but you are a proof. I think we're always, those two best friends who are always supporting each other. I've always supported your career. Like, we're the porristas, the cheerleaders for each other. And that's so wonderful. And speaking of that support, that like being a porrista for one another, I think going back to that thing that happened to me at 14 and looking at it now, now that I'm much older, obviously, I think that at that young age, it did bring me down, and I didn't encounter shame because of it. I knew at a very early age after that I was always going to have a mission, that I had a mission, and that mission was sort of, empowering future generations, my generation, because at that very moment, I knew why my ancestors, had all these battle scars. We talked about this in the beginning of the intro of this episode, and I knew that we have to work with each other, and I think that our future generations depend on it so much.
And I'm sorry to cut you off quick, but I also think that if you feel like someone doesn't have a voice, then why not be that voice for them? And in my case, I don't know if I could ever, there's so many times where maybe I have felt that way, like the shame, but I also can't pinpoint them at this exact moment, because I would have to get into detail, and that takes a lot.
I gotta go back to my journal when I
have to go back to my journal, the date exact. No. I think that we would need like 3 hours to talk, because I love to talk. But no, I think that there was this one time where I felt like that. I was younger. I wasn't as young as you, where I was like in my early 20s, and where I won't name names. I won't name anything. We don't do that in this podcast. But a friend did tell me, hey, they want you to do whatever is going on because they want a Mexican voice.
Yeah.
And I was like, excuse me?
Yep.
And I swear I can be educated as ever, but pick a button and se me sale lo. Excuse me, sir.
What is a Mexican voice? I don't know.
Yes.
Elaborate.
Yeah, and I was so young. I mean, like I said, in my early 20s, still young adult, and I knew that that was not right. But I also didn't know how to stand up for myself and say something about it without burning the bridges that I have worked so hard to get to.
Yeah.
So, like I mentioned a little bit ago, is sometimes you have to be the voice for the people that don't have that voice. And it's not because they don't have a voice. It's just that sometimes they don't know how to go about it. And I see that in our culture so much. When, for example, I go down a restaurant or something, pre-COVID, of course, and I see a sir trying to talk to somebody else, and you can tell that they don't know how to talk English.
Yeah.
And you feel bad because that person is probably mocking them for their language or their accent. And
they're parroting it.
Yeah, and it's not right. So that's where, for example, I'll come in. I don't know if you've ever experienced
I always
this.
do at the post office.
I don't know if you've ever
store.
experienced this. If you've ever had somebody talk to you in English, and por ejemplo is, you know, Mexicano, like, you know, raised in Mexico, and then they try to talk to you in English, and, you know, they're trying, and then you tell them something in Spanish, and you can just see the face of clarity.
Yeah.
Like, wow, like ella entiende, you know, y por ejemplo, that's why I'm saying that I have seen other people go through that, being judged for their accents, being judged for the way they look, being judged for what they do. And at the end of the day, we're all trying to make a living.
Don't be the shame instigator, you know, let's work together, I think, to overcome that, you know. And you talking about, I think you mentioned something about how, some people might not know, like, how do you overcome it, or what do we do? I think, you know, there's this common pattern of the majority of us don't know how to, because in some ways, you know, not throwing shame on public schools. No, I mean, I owe a lot to the public school system, but I think that we're not given the mechanisms or the tools to overcome that in a way that can solve more issues and do harm
if you're not given the tools. Exactly. And hopefully that changes in the future, and hopefully little pieces like this podcast, digital platforms, people of our, I mean, we saw it with the Black Lives Matter movement. People didn't care that there was a pandemic going on, and not because they didn't care, it's just that they realized their voice was bigger than the problem at hand. And I think just like with our Mexican American culture, nuestra voz es nuestro orgullo y tenemos que hablar, say it in English. I mean, I go into my Spanish and then I lose myself. But in English, it's like we have to use our voice as a tool.
You know, I'm always, when I'm having conversations, I always think the power of el testimonio. The power of compartiendo nuestras experiencias, y cómo el compartirlo nos hace más fuertes, ¿no? Y al mismo tiempo nos une. Claro. Sharing these lived experiences.
The testimonies unite us.
These shared experiences, because there's a commonality in all of them. And I think that's what you're trying to say, and that really empowers a marginalized community.
Yes.
And I think about that now. I mean, you and I talking about this now, these were things that, you know, for me as a teenager, you knew about it, but you didn't really talk about it.
Yeah. And the generation before, I mean, they never had the freedom, maybe is the word.
I think some people really did, you know, vocalize it. But
they were shut down.
And absolutely, you are shut down time and time again. Yeah.
Yes, and that's not the way we should be moving forward in the world. I think we all have a voice, and no matter if you are a teen or if you are already older generation, everyone should have a voice. Everyone should be proud to step out of the margin and wear you know, they're you know what I was gonna say, el nopal en la frente, like wear with pride.
Oh, I know, absolutely.
You know?
I mean, I have
was
like
trying to find
100
a way.
little nopalitos at my house that I like water every day.
Yes, those are so cute. But besides the point, you know, usa el nopal en la frente con orgullo, y si te dicen algo, then come and talk to us.
Yes.
We'll take care of it. No, but
come talk to hijas de la Chicanx community. We're here for you.
And if, like I mentioned earlier, if you have ever felt like you had a story or you could never stand up in that moment, I mean, our podcast is literally an outlet for it. And I don't mean in the sense that we're gonna go and tell your story to the world. No. Con confianza, sometimes I feel that we all need to talk about problems.
Yeah.
And this comes with mental
Whoever's
health.
ready, yeah.
Yeah, mental health is a big thing that right now we are all embracing, and I think it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I
think it's a beautiful thing. So if you ever feel like maybe this podcast made you resonate with something that went on in your life and you just want to let it out,
please share that story.
Please share that with us. And I don't mean it so we can talk about it on the podcast. I mean more so to
to know that I feel heard and yes, somebody else out there is saying I've gone through
or
that
let it
too.
go. Maybe that's your way of letting go of that.
Right. I think one thing with this phenomenon of shame is how do you liberate yourself from it?
Sometimes you need to speak about it.
You think about the let it go. I'm not talking about let it go from Frozen. I'm talking about
my Disney mind went there. Let it go.
No, I'm talking about this phenomenon of shame, you know, understanding it so you can begin to dissect it and unpack it, and then liberating yourself from it.
Agreed. 100% agree. And just like any episode that, you know, we already spoke on, these are little puzzle pieces that I think
are all going to come together to create this bigger puzzle.
Yeah, and this is just like our little granito of, you know, making the bigger picture just seem more clear.
Getting some clarity.
Yeah, clarity for sure. This, we could talk about this forever, and we'll bring it up later.
Yeah, I think some things that we can even add to this phenomenon of shame and marginalized communities that are often, you know, subaltern or at the peripheral communities. You know, I think even being bilingual, speaking Spanglish, these are all things that we could talk about. And I think that they're so big that they're an episode on
in itself. Yeah.
And we will probably have that in the future.
We will. And I think that's the beauty of, you know, having these topics, because then we talk about something and then something else comes from it. It's a little up, how would you say, like connecting the dots. There's raíces que vienen por todos lados.
Yeah. I mean, we always talk about our identity is beautiful. We love it, but it's so complex. There's so much complexity and so much to entangle that I often think about, you know, when a detective is like trying to solve a case and
there's so many pieces,
a pin here and a pin over there and a string over here, and that's kind of how it feels like sometimes.
That's literally,
and the podcast has been feeling like that sometimes too, in a beautiful way.
In such a beautiful way, because you and I have these conversations just in our friendship itself.
We've always kind of,
but I think it's so cool to be able to speak to an audience and where maybe they relate. I've been hearing a lot of feedback about like, oh my god, it's so relatable. And that's the reason why I felt like this podcast was needed. I love podcasts. I listen to podcasts all the time, but I never found one in where I felt like it related to me and my culture.
Like most of the aspects of it did.
Yes,
perhaps.
But it's not completely relatable because, you know,
it like catered to you but not entirely.
Correct.
Yeah.
So with that, I think we're closing out today's episode. I wish we could talk more, but we'll leave you with that little teaser, leaving the door open like we said last time, and
for future conversations.
And then hopefully one day we can have a guest and where we can elaborate more about these things, like going back to like mental health, you know, maybe we can have like a therapist come on here, or maybe we can have
Latinx, Chicanx therapist.
So many people that we could have on here. So if you feel like you could be a guest, you feel like you want to be featured as a music creative or creative medium, anything, please feel free to reach out to us at our digital platforms. That is Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok, and you can find us under the username at Hijas de la Chicanx podcast, but I will spell it out for you. That is HIJASDLCHICANX podcast. And you can also listen to us on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and Amazon Music. That's it.
That's it, everybody.
We are done with today's episode. Thank you so much for listening to us. We hope we enlightened you in some way.
We hope so. And remember, you don't owe your trauma story to anybody, and you don't need it to validate other people's opinions of you or their need to improve society. Those are your stories. And always remember, I'm always going to end with this. Your voice matters.
Thank you, guys. We'll talk to you guys next week.